So, I mean, just for the audience, could you tell us a little bit about your experience, like high level, maybe 2-minute view?
Yeah, definitely. I always like to say I started my career as an account manager, and I did that for almost 7 years at an education technology company based in New York. So I sold, implemented, retained, renew, and upsold software for schools. And I credit actually my success to committing to one discipline for that long of a time, because I really internalized all aspects of it and really understood the importance of the customer in every business. From there, I went to ZocDoc and had an amazing experience there. I actually started frontline customer support for 6 months, early days, and it was awesome because I was able to actually see all of the problems in the business, and within 6 months synthesize the trends, and ultimately make a recommendation to build out a post-sale function that didn't exist at the time, that would solve all of the big problems that I was seeing, ultimately improving the patient and the doctor experience, but also reducing churn and increasing retention and dropping support volume. So they gave me the opportunity to build out the team. So 18 months went from 2 to 25 people, from no post-sale function to the structure that still exists today there. Learned so much about team building, hiring, recruiting, process, playbooks, all of that good stuff. Then I went to Grubhub and they needed me to build out an AM team. So I was like, I've done this. All right. I did it again for the B2B side of the business. So not the restaurants, but the corporate customers from the seamless business. Then went to Q and they said, we need you to build out our account management function. I was like, I got this. And then Q was really the experience that allowed me to broaden my scope in a way that I've realized is where I want to continue to focus my career. So went from director of account management, a month in, took on support. 5 months later, took on sales. A few months after that, took on marketing, then took on both our first and third party operations, and eventually was promoted to chief operating officer, managed by Q. And, I think I love account management and had that tunnel vision. But once I had the broader scope, I was really able to see how everything is so interconnected, how having real alignment across all those functions is so important, and so many businesses don't have it. And also really made me appreciate the sort of how important the fundamentals of the business are, the product offering, the business model, and the leadership team. And if those ingredients aren't in the mix, it could really impact whether you're successful or not. So I'll pause there. That's a lot of talking, but that's sort of the 2-minute to 3-minute overview.
Yeah, I got some good questions here. So the first one is, so at Q, you guys had a CMO, yeah?
So we did not. We had a VP of marketing that was there when I joined, who left soon after. So the CEO was managing marketing for a few months before he asked me to take it on.
Oh, so you were in marketing too?
Correct. It was sort of everything from marketing, sales, account management, customer support, okay. And then Q was a service company, so there were significant operational teams to deliver what people purchased from us.
So I think we have our first topic to debate here. So what I'm thinking, I mean, in a lot of companies, your title was COO there, but in a lot of companies it would be CRO. Yeah. And so I've always wondered, from a CRO side, would it be better to have almost like what your role was at Q, less the marketing, and then the CMO? I've always wondered. And
whether a CRO should own marketing or not, or whether it should be a separate leader?
Yeah. What do you think?
So I think that I actually think both structures can work, but I think it's really dependent upon the business, the actual stage, and the role that marketing plays in that business. And so I think at the time, the way that the stage that we were at for Q specifically, it worked for us because having one leader own that, who had sort of more of the revenue focus, we were able to align activities in a way that made sense. What's interesting though is actually, Q is in this really exciting pivot as they're moving into more of a SaaS software business versus a services model. And within that context, the role of marketing becomes so different. And so as they're moving into this next stage, I actually believe having a dedicated CMO is actually most important, because they need to build a brand and build inbound in a way that the company never really had before, given the prior business sort of models and offerings. So I just think it's highly dependent. And I think, I don't think there's one size fits all structure in every org, and you just have to think really critically. You can't take your playbook from your last company and just implement it on the new one. You have to really diagnose and understand what you have and create the org structure that makes sense to support the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Sure. Yeah, I guess my number one concern, if you have a CRO taking on all of those functions, is that the CRO typically comes from a sales background, right? Not a marketing background. And I think that you put yourself at risk of having your marketing team really become just a sales focused short-term type of engine. And I've seen it happen at companies that way. So I've been thinking that the ideal structure is CRO who takes sales, AM, success, potentially support, and marketing. And then you have the CMO that's running marketing, which could be brand. And in some companies, marketing should have a lot of involvement in product, in pricing, and in go-to-market strategy. And so, I mean, obviously it's dependent on the business, the type of business, ACVs, leadership, skills, and all those. But how do you feel about that idea? Because I'm not sure that's an idea that would be well received from a lot of people.
So I think that if sort of brand awareness and generating meaningful inbound, like meaningful organic inbound, is critical to the success of the business, having a dedicated leader focused on that alone is important. And having that be separate, I think, makes sense. I think a couple of things that I would add is, I've seen it as well where the CRO or the head of sales is more focused on the short-term goals, but that's typically a result of the executive team in the business making that a priority, right? And so, like, I think obviously the CRO has a voice in that. They should have a perspective and an opinion, but so often I feel like companies are creating these environments where they make everybody feel like there is no other choice. We have to hit these short-term things or we won't succeed. And so I think I don't like to put all the blame on the head of sales or the CRO there. It's the responsibility of the entire executive team to align on, what is important. Now, there are going to be times when I think a company might have to make a short-term, trade-off to hit a short-term goal to survive. Like, that's reality. But what I'm interested in is how can we create confidence in companies, and/or like what sort of set of ingredients needs to exist where that pressure isn't there anymore. Mm-hmm. And you posted something this morning that I think speaks to it. I think people skip over, is our offering actually amazing? Do we have product market fit? And is our business model sound? And do we have healthy unit economics? I think that we need to go back to actually caring about that in the first, 18 months of your company, and getting that right with a very lean team before you try and, brute force growth.
Mm-hmm. Because you can get to $1 to $5 million brute force.
Yeah. You can even get more through brute force.
Poor product market fit. You're at risk of churn long term. The business is going to slow down as the market realizes that there's either a better product or the product's not doing exactly what you say that it can do. And it's going to lead, and at that point, you've already taken on a lot of funding, and it creates this. That's, I think, one of the reasons why you have this high pressure, short term focused environment, is because you've raised too much money. You're over leveraged, right? What other reasons would cause this like very short term kind of like pressure on an entire organization that starts at the leadership team and works its way down?
I think, hitting goals for investors to secure funding. I also think it can be this is sort of the tough thing to balance, because as a leader of a company, you want to exert a confidence and an optimism about your long-term vision and journey, but you might not be there quite yet. And so what is the right balance of that confidence and saying that this is where we're going and where we're headed, but also being honest about where you actually are today? And I think that I think what is required is people build out too big of a team too soon and in the wrong functions. And so to your point, it would probably actually make sense to have that CMO hired as one of your first leaders before you actually have much of a sales team at all, or even a CRO. And so, I think if we're able to kind of shift that mind frame and people have that approach, it's like you need the brand awareness and the inbound. And then once you have a ton of that, then you can bring in a CRO to actually manage all of that inbound demand and maximize that revenue. But I think what happens is people do it in the opposite order.
That's all I've seen.
Yeah.
Is you walk in before you even think about bringing in a CMO or even like it depends on the company, director level marketer, whatever, head of marketing, we'll just call it, is there's 8 SDRs and 4 account executives and a head of sales before you even think about having them. I've seen that at least 2 companies now. So how do we convince founders to think about that differently?
It's a good question. I think, I don't know. I think it's really about using your money smarter. I think it's taking off the pressure to succeed so quickly. I think it's respecting the process, being honest about how much time it takes, not over investing in your team too early, and being responsible. I also think people worry a little too much. If I have product market fit and insane growth, the unit economics will work themselves out. I don't think people pay enough attention to the business model.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's take a little transition. What are some of if you kind of look out and look at a lot of companies, what do you think some of the big top challenges they're facing on the account management and success side right now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that there's a couple of things. So I think number one is I don't think that function is truly respected in the way that it should be in organizations. Every company says they're customer centric. Every company says that they put their customer first. But when you actually look at the internal dynamics, or how that team is perceived, how they're compensated, how they're supported, people don't put their money where their mouth is. And so the reality is the bulk of revenue for most companies, especially SaaS companies, is from your current customer base. And you can grow more from your current customer base than from any net new acquisitions within, a year or 2-year period. But sales is the sort of the team that is celebrated. They are the most highly compensated. They have 5 different tools to support them. And you have your account management team, sort of underpaid and using Google Sheets to manage their, customer base. And so I think it starts from the top. The company needs to truly embrace a customer-centric approach. That needs to be coming down from the leadership team. And then you need to make the appropriate investments. So you should pay account managers, success folks, just like you pay salespeople. I actually think that in some contexts, variable comp works, but in others it doesn't. And so you need to be really thoughtful about whether you're implementing a variable comp structure for AM or CS. And then I think you need to invest in the tools to support them. So whether it's Gainsight or Totango, there's all these great tools out there that can really elevate that. And then the other thing is having really clear distinctions and handoffs between sales, sort of AM and CS, as well as the support layer. Your account management and customer success team must be proactive and not reactive. You need to figure out a way to drive that reactive stuff to support. And you need to make sure that, sales is selling to the right customer, they're setting the right expectations, they're making good sales. So those are some keys that I think are important. Also, there are not a lot of I think there are a lot of rising leaders, but there are not a lot of, great executive leaders that have focused on this function. And I hope that we see that begin to change, because most CROs or others that own that function, again, are coming up through sales, and not that. So they don't understand the intricacies of how difficult that function really is.
Yeah. Now, on the perception and compensation, I've seen both of those. At the perception, definitely seen as not as important and things like that on the success side versus sales, and the compensation sometimes ridiculously spread between the two functions. So why is that happening? Is it because the function is relatively new, that recurring revenue model businesses in general are relatively new, especially when you look at a lot of the leaders? A lot of those leaders are 40 plus, and when they started doing the stuff, it wasn't recurring revenue model business, might have not been the path. Mm-hmm. So in that case, it was all about net new acquisition for the most part. Why is that happening, and how can we change it?
So I think that why it's happening is probably, to build on what you said, the people that are in leadership roles making these types of decisions around structure and investment just don't have enough knowledge or respect of the function to understand the importance. I think the misperception that pervades all of this is people think it's easy. They're like, oh, new business is just so hard, and it is hard. Sales is hard. So it's not meant to diminish that. But like, I like to use the analogy of like online dating. It's like, if you want to go on a date, you can follow a prescribed set of activities, and you can pretty much guarantee that after a few tries, you will get a date, right? So it's like, that's one approach where it's like, okay, I'm going to do these things and I can get to that outcome. But then when you start a relationship with someone, like, the rule book goes out the window. Like, there is not a prescribed set of activities that you can always do to ensure that you can maintain a long-term, healthy, productive, relationship. The reality is it's so nuanced. There's so many things that go into it. And so, of course you create playbooks and best practices and engagement cadences and all of these things, but it's just such a different beast that you have to tackle, and people don't appreciate the complexity and the difficulty around that. And they think, oh, it's easy. They're just like, all they need to do is get them to like adopt the product and deliver a business outcome. Like, sales got the customer in, like, just make that happen. And I see it all the time. They blame churn on the account management team. Like, oh, the account management team just sucks and they didn't do their job, and that's why we have high churn. But they'll never look at whether the offering is strong or whether we sold to the right customer or all of these other factors that go into it. So I rant over.
So what did you do for a framework, being able to oversee all of those functions to move that perception in the direction that you think it should be in?
So I was not able to do as much as I wanted, specifically like at Q, just given sort of how quickly things were moving. To be honest, a lot of these thoughts that I have, some I was able to implement and some that I wasn't. So I hope in my next role, I'm able to continue to carry this message forward and begin to impact more change. We were able to make some changes on compensation. I think, I was able to implement Gainsight at Grubhub, which was such a great experience. And I think that we were in a position there where we were really embracing that importance, and the investment was beginning to follow. So I think it's a few things. One of the things that I try and do when I go into any organization is position myself as the voice of the customer. And so if I'm managing the customer team, I'm shadowing, I'm getting in front of customers. I often will actually like account manage one or two customers myself, just so that I actually am close to the process and close to a customer, and build credibility within the organization. So I think that's sort of the first step, is you need to do your due diligence and your homework, and you need to put in the effort, and you need to actually position yourself as that. then you need to make a clear case, right? You need to paint the picture through the business metrics that making decisions in this regard will drive the business results that we're all trying to achieve. It seems obvious and it seems like common sense, but being able to actually paint that picture with the KPIs and the metrics that your business cares about is super important. And so once you build that credibility as the voice of the customer, once you paint that picture that making those investments are directly connected to the bottom line, then you have to begin to chip away at all of those things. So I would start with actually attacking the compensation of the team first, because that's going to drive the candidate profile that you can attract and actually begin to build an all-star team in that regard. Then it's tools. So how are we supporting this team? And let's make some investments there to do that. And then similarly, I think one feedback loop that's often, if it's not broken, there's always room for improvement, is the link between the customer team and product and marketing. And of course, product and marketing folks should be talking to customers directly, but they very often don't leverage all of the great knowledge and gold that exists in the internal team. And so making sure that those connections are strong so that we're really, number one, that elevates the perception of that team internally in the company, as well as it maximizes, the inputs that marketing and product have to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, on the perception and compensation of success, I see that very similarly on the marketing side.
Yeah.
Relative to sales, I wonder if it makes sense to try and get a little bit more balanced.
It does. And I think similar with marketing, I think people will often say, oh, well, that's easy. You're building a website or you're making a one pager or whatever it is. And I think because I think sales can be very, instant gratification. I'm going to do these inputs and I'm going to immediately get these outputs. And similar with success, like marketing is, I'm going to do a lot of stuff and I might not be able to prove to you on like a spreadsheet that this worked, right? And I think a lot of companies now, which I'm actually a big fan of being data driven, I think sometimes people can take it too far.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that a lot.
And but it is important to be data driven. So it's you need to just find the right balance, and you need to just recognize that there are some things that can't be measured in a spreadsheet, but that you can know whether they're working or not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. I keep going back to how much has changed in the past 10 or 15 years relative to business models, overall communication, which has shifted the importance of different functions inside of a company. So in 2004, you could basically, and Salesforce is a great example, you can basically grow a company with only sales and a decent product. And I think that is significantly harder unless you're a unicorn today.
Yeah.
I don't think that people have recognized that. I think we're still running. I think a lot of, especially startup SaaS companies, are trying to run a play like their Salesforce 2001. Mm-hmm. And I don't understand. I don't understand why we haven't adapted to the things that have changed.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the topic we were talking about at the beginning, where you get this huge round of funding and then have all this pressure to show growth, and sort of this growth at all costs mentality. Mm-hmm. That I feel like that is beginning to shift, but there's quite a way to go still.
There's not a ton of examples, but I have a couple in my head right now of companies based in Boston that have bootstrapped and built incredible companies. Mm-hmm. I don't know why raising money has to be the way to do it. It's almost like the fact that you raise 19 million Series B is better than actually making money.
Yeah.
It's been very interesting as I've kind of elevated over the past 5 years of my career to actually start to recognize what's actually going on.
Yeah. And there's that book, I don't know if you've ever read that book, Blitzscaling, which is a pretty good book, but
Sounds great. The title's catchy.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I think that in certain circumstances, playing devil's advocate a little bit, if you do have this offering or this product that is getting a lot of traction, but there are a lot of others in the space, raising a bunch of money and pumping that investment to sort of boost you and get you into the front of the race can be a good tactic. So I do think that there are times when that is, the right approach. But I think the problem that we have today is everybody thinks that's the only approach.
Or everyone thinks that they're
that product
ready for that.
Yeah.
That it's a competitive market. They're ready to go. They're like, if you inject $50 million, that you'll suddenly just grow like weeds. I think, it's interesting. So tell me on I think let's break it into two, because I think this will be interesting for the audience. So on success and then separately support, what's the one status quo type thing that everyone still does that they shouldn't be doing? And so to give you an example on marketing, mine is how people approach trade shows.
Got it.
And so I think we approach a trade show the exact same way as we did in 1999 when it mattered a lot more. And so we still go through the motions, design the booth, build the booth, send 20 people, everyone gets drunk every night. We get a couple leads. We pass them to the sales team. The sales team maybe follows up, maybe doesn't. We close 0 deals, and then we just do it all again next year. So what's that example in success and then separately support?
Yeah. So I think if you tackle success first, I think that a lot of the habits that have developed sort of over time for that team is if I can only just get in front of that customer for a check-in meeting, then that will drive the outcomes that I want. And so it's this sort of vicious cycle of sort of low value engagement that is not compelling enough for the customer to engage in. So can I stop by to check in and see how you're doing? I just wanted to set this QBR up because it's the next quarter and we need to talk again, without being intentional about how they can add value at all of those interactions. What I will say is very often success teams, though, are so bogged down with plugging gaps in the product or the offering and reacting that that's all that they have, that's all the energy that they have left for their proactive touch points. So I'm not blaming the team for that. There's often structural things that need to be addressed, but we need to move away from sort of time-based or milestone-based interactions that don't actually add value and really figure out what are the right engagement cadences and touch points and how is the customer actually benefiting from this? Adopting the product for the sake of adopting the product so they renew is not the way to be thinking about it. So I think that's the biggest shift that success teams need to embrace, and in a very consistent way. So for support, I think the big thing for support for me is, although it should be primarily a reactive, function, calls, emails, chats, etc. The best support teams that I've worked with, we have created a couple of ways that team is proactive with customers. So one thing that I think is really important and that I care about, and we did this at Q, I had this customer love program. And so for no reason, or sometimes for reasons, we would just surprise and delight our customers. And so if we heard they got a round of funding, or they went public, or they had a huge product milestone, we would pay attention to the things that are going on with our customers and send them a gift or a handwritten note, or drop by and, whatever, congratulate them. It's those little moments that actually really build, affinity and trust. And so, it it's not going to make your company money, right? Like it's just doing a nice thing. Like, so
Yeah.
that proactive nice thing. I think the other thing is with support is enforcing boundaries with your customers and being comfortable saying no and pushing back. It needs to be done in the right way, but I think sometimes people over index on, I'm going to do anything my customer needs, no matter what. And maybe it's not actually in the best interest of them or the business. And I always say that if you can effectively tell a customer no and navigate that conversation effectively, you have created respect and trust in a way that you would not have if you just said yes.
Mhm.
So I think those would be the two things on the support side that I would push people to think about, because it can add a lot of value.
Fantastic. And then what is I love the surprise and delight topic. I think that it's underutilized in general. And I see it probably because of the tech vendors making its way into sales. And I'm not sure how I feel about it.
Like the gifting and things like that?
Yeah, I honestly don't like it, actually, to be honest. I think that on the customer side, they've already bought into your product and you have a clear relationship. And a lot of my opinions people don't agree with, so I'm comfortable sharing them. I think I would perceive it as disingenuous if I was trying to buy a $20,000 ACV SaaS product. I got off a discovery call, and 3 days later, I got a $5 like a gift card. Like that's not going to make a difference whether or not I buy your product. It makes no difference in the value that you deliver to me. What I'm looking for from you as a rep is to show me exactly what problem your product solves and how I can get it implemented most efficiently, and to do that in a very streamlined and compelling way so my buying process is a pleasant experience.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I'm super happy if you disagree. I think it'd be a fun debate, but like, what do you think about that? Because I think it's going to continue to grow over time, despite the fact, like, whether my opinion's right or wrong, the tech vendors are going to keep pushing it forward in the sake of ABM or whatever else they're doing. So what's your stance on that?
So I think that I've done a lot of different gifting stuff with prospects. So I think I would also say the way you handle it with prospects and customers is sort of different.
Totally.
So if you tackle just prospects first, I think that I've seen it work well in two different ways, and not at the milestone that you suggested. So I think it can be a way to get in front of your prospect for the first time. So I think it can be really effective if you're trying to get a meeting and they're ignoring you or they're not willing to meet with you. And, I've done like probably stuff that you hate, but like sending like a drone without the remote and being like, if you meet with me, I'll bring the remote to the meeting. You can use this cool gift.
Okay.
So I think if you already have a demo and then you're sending like a gift card at post a demo, that's not going to move the needle. But I think it can be effective to break through the noise and get them to agree to an initial conversation. So I think that if it's well executed, and that also, it should not be done across the board. It should be done with very strategic prospects where you've gone through your regular playbook and it just isn't working. And this can be a different tactic to use that could get you in front of them. So those things have worked effectively, and I think can be a fun way to get their attention. That said, though, I don't actually think gifting, other than at the very beginning, throughout the sales process, actually changes anything. And to your point, I think can feel disingenuous. What I will say, though, is, and I've done this personally, when let's say you go through the process and you lose a deal, no, this isn't the right time. I often will send something like, I lost this big deal at Q, and I then sent him over like a gift package and was just like, hey, I'm sorry that this didn't work out. Like, I enjoyed getting to know you. If, anything changes in the future, and the option that you decided didn't work, keep me in mind, let's keep in touch, right? So almost like a parting gift to end the relationship on a positive note and kind of keep the door open, has worked well. And then they chose the other provider, it didn't work out, and they remember me because I sort of left an impression as my last impression. Mm-hmm. So that's how I would use it within a new business context. I think on the sort of customer context, if you do it right, it doesn't feel disingenuous, and it's like 100%. A really great relationship builder with a current customer. Because it's just like, you're already a customer, you just had this cool thing happen, and like, we're taking a time to proactively celebrate you and appreciate you. Yeah.
Especially, I mean, I think in any type of gifting scenario, the key thing that needs to happen is that it needs to be done with no expectation of a result. I think that's really as you kind of pinpointed those couple ways that you've used it, but worked, what I found is, whether it's on the customer side or the couple situations you did on the other side, it's that you didn't have a desired outcome. For the meeting, you kind of did, but if they didn't show up to the meeting, you wouldn't have gotten sad, or maybe you would have lost the drone.
Just have a drone remote with no drone.
Yeah. I think maybe as I like kind of think about it myself, that's the sticking point for me, is like, you're after a discovery call, you're sending me the gift card, not because you want to send me the gift card, but because you want me to move forward in your sales process. That's how
like a bribe, basically.
Pretty much. Yeah. So we'll get close to wrapping up here. We'll do one more question. Maybe we'll have a little conversation about it afterwards. So most of the companies that I work with are companies that are 5 to 100K ACV. So we kind of move away from the super transactional, and we kind of move away from the super enterprise deals. We're in the middle. Now, what in those types of deals, which is a wide spectrum, what do you think is the most important thing to, and maybe this question is too broad as I think about it, to implement at an early stage? Maybe it's too broad.
Just like an SMB business in general?
Like growth, early stage companies. So let's say they're $5 million SaaS company. They sell a 10K ACV product to someone. They clearly have gotten to 5 million for a reason. And I'm sure that you see a lot of companies like that. What's something that they should be looking to do in 2020?
So I think one thing that I've really, one exercise that I have seen be critical to sort of this, if I'm interpreting you correctly, is having really strong alignment on what your customer journey map is. And so what I would suggest is, in like going into this year, you have this product, you have some success, things are working. You're going to need to continue to elevate what your customer journey is, and actually going through a very explicit exercise of everything from marketing to sales to success and support, and how the product interacts across all of those points, is a very worthy exercise. So what I have found when I've done this is people across different functions actually have wildly different assumptions about maybe what's actually happening or what should happen. And so I find going through that can be a really strong forcing function for alignment across all of those things, as well as I often think sometimes, especially in an early company, you end up kind of falling into something without being intentional about it. And so if you do have some success, you should be constantly pulling back at regular intervals and actually asking yourself, am I driving the intended behavior and outcome that I want at each step of this process? I'm a big believer in being intentional with everything that you do. And I think sometimes when you're in a fast hyper growth company, you end up just doing stuff because of like inertia and momentum and not because of intention. And so that's one thing that I would say that can be important and can kind of like tackle sort of the whole like journey, multiple teams, and ensure that you know, you're intentionally delivering what you want to your customer and that your company is aligned internally.
I love it. Any parting wisdom?
So I think for 2020, I hope that we begin to really really put our money where our mouth is with respect to putting the customer first within our organization and within our business. I think that so many people say it but don't actually mean it, and so I think that that means a lot of things. But I think number one, like it, you know, no growth at all costs. You know, grow responsibly and do something that actually matters. Invest in the right structure of your company and prioritize your customer teams, and really make sure that product, marketing, executive leadership are talking to customers on a regular basis. I think it's like super basic, and I think for whatever reason, whether people want to be sophisticated or fancy or think that they know everything, people don't do that the way that they should anymore.
Mm-hmm. People that win do the fundamentals really well.
Yep.
In sports, if you're a executive chef, if you're a executive in a business, just do the fundamentals well.
Yep. Back to basics.
I love it. Cool. Well, we'll be able to cut that out right there. This was so fun.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love your perspective. We share a lot of the same ideas.
For that. No, I agree. And I think that, you know, this is an interesting time right now because I feel like there's sort of the next cohort of leaders that will be sort of influencing and leading the next generation of companies. And so I think it's exciting to be a part of that. And we didn't get to it today in this conversation, but I think like my other angle is like also just like how people lead. I think I've been in all of these different companies, and whether or not it's true, like I just believe in leading with like kindness, empathy, vulnerability, and you can still have super high standards, hold people accountable, you know, have tough conversations and make tough decisions. Like people think that those two things have to be separate, and it's just not true. And I think more and more I want to be part of kind of changing that leadership approach as well. And I do feel like women more naturally have those things. Obviously, men too. So this is not meant to exclude a gender in any case. But I think that sort of the topic that we just talked about and that are the things that I care the most about and want to try and have like a positive, you know, influence going forward on the future.
I think that you could really, if you wanted to, just based on what I heard in the conversation, put like a flag in the ground and be the person that really tries to move the success function forward. Mm-hmm. I think you could do that, whether you are doing it at a company or on your own. I'm trying to, in a lot of ways, do that in marketing to change the perception of and elevate the importance of the function. And yeah, like I don't think a lot of people are doing it, or maybe I just don't recognize it. I think it's a really, there's infinite people talking about how important sales is. Mm-hmm. And if you look across other different functions, there's either not a lot of content and or the content that's out there isn't very good.
Yeah. No, it's something I've been thinking about a lot. There's one guy, Lincoln Murphy, who's awesome, and he has this great blog. And then there's like folks from Gainsight. Like Gainsight's really tried to be the thought leader with respect to that. But I totally agree. Yeah, and I think I did my live with Jake on the topic, and one of the opportunities I'm looking at is actually for a VP of customer success, and thinking of, I have a couple of like COO opportunities, but I'm kind of like, you know what, maybe kind of going back to my roots and, you know, even like putting the sort of ego and title aside, like that's where I think I could have the most, and that could just fuel that platform for whatever future potential opportunities I might want to pursue.
Yeah, I mean, I have to believe that there are a ton of companies that would pay a lot of money to have a group of people come in and fix their success team.
Yeah. For that. And then if I can go into another company that I think will have a strong exit in 3 to 5 years and
I'll give you the story.
do it again there. And like, that's just one more thing. Cause it has been interesting as I've gone through, I've been in a lot of different types of companies and different contexts. And I learned by mistake trying to implement a prior playbook that it doesn't work that way. And so I think there are some fundamentals and some best practices, but there's just sort of an approach that you have to take to understand what you actually need to do in your business for that function.